I don't think GPT-5 is conscious. I just don't.
And there are people who do, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if I have a good argument against them.
Right.
I don't think so.
Do you hedge your bets on it? I do. Are you nice to GPT-5? Hey, everyone. Today, I'm so pleased that my conversation will be with Steven Pinker, who many of you no doubt know, cognitive scientist who's really reshaped our understanding of language, the mind, human nature. He's done so much to help us all understand the profound need for evidence and reason in understanding ourselves and the nature of the world. So, Steven, thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to jump right in with a puzzle that was making the rounds. I'm sure you heard of the Monty Hall puzzle from a few years ago. And I'm sure our audience knows of it, but just basically, there are 3 doors in the game. There's a prize behind one door. You pick a given door, and then the host, Monty Hall, opens one of the other doors and there's nothing there and offers you the opportunity to switch. And the question is, do you switch? Now, when most people encountered that, in fact, many mathematicians got this wrong, you say, why would I switch? There's like 50-50 now, 2 doors, and maybe I got it, maybe I didn't. But when you actually work it out mathematically, you should switch. And the key to it, and the reason why I'm asking it, is because you need to take into account that that Monty Hall knows where the prize actually is. And so it's kind of this meta-knowledge that enters into the situation. And if you don't take that into account, you sort of miss the correct strategy to maximize your chance of winning. Now, in your most recent book, you kind of take that idea to a much more profound place, where you speak about our need to know that somebody else knows, that we know, that they know, and so forth. And this notion of common knowledge is vital for our interactions, for how we live, for how we negotiate. A thumbnail sketch of the importance of this idea of common knowledge.
Yeah, so what's happening in the Monty Hall problem is not common knowledge, but it is knowledge about knowledge. To use a fancy term, recursive mentalizing, where mentalizing means getting into someone else's head, trying to figure out what they know. Recursive mentalizing is trying to get inside their head when they're trying to get inside your head as you try to get inside their head ad infinitum. So that's common knowledge. In the case of the Monty Hall problem, it's private knowledge, namely, Monty Hall knows you know that he knows, you don't know what he knows.
Right.
And that is, you're right, absolutely crucial to doing the right thing, which most people don't do, famously, including Paul Erdős, perhaps the world's most beloved mathematician at the time. The irony being that it's not only that you can deduce using probability theory what is the optimal choice, which is, yes, you do switch. But if you're really curious, you could just do it the dumb way, which mathematicians hate, but which...
you just simulate it or go through the damn thing?
You just go through the damn thing. You write out all the possibilities and you count them out. Things that ignoramuses like I do when we're not confident enough in our mathematical prowess.
Right.
But the advantage being that it always works. But so that's a case where, for reasons we won't get into today, there are cognitive biases that lead people into the wrong answer. But you're right that a crucial assumption of that and many game theory problems is that their knowledge is common knowledge. That is, your opponent in a game theory scenario knows the payoffs and the probabilities. You know that they know it, they know you know it, and that's what's needed to come to a solution as to what you ought to do. That is, you assume that your opponent knows the situation and knows that you're going to respond rationally. But common knowledge more generally is necessary for coordination, for 2 people being on the same page. It's not enough that I know, if we're going to rendezvous, that I know that you're going to go to Pete's and you might know that I like to go to Starbucks. To end up at the same place, if we can't communicate directly, which is a way to generate common knowledge, we might each try to outguess where the other one's going to guess each of us is, but there's no solution to the problem. That's one of the reasons I think we evolved language. It's a quick and easy way to generate common knowledge. You blurt something out, You've said it, they know that you said it, you know they know, and that solves a lot of these coordination dilemmas. But not all. There are a lot that we solve by salient signals or events, things that are out there, things that just pop out in the landscape. Thomas Schelling, the political scientist who probably first elucidated the idea of common knowledge, imagined a couple trying to affect a rendezvous. This was way before cell phones were invented. They didn't make plans in advance. What are they going to do? He speculated they would meet at the clock in Grand Central Station, even if that wasn't particularly close to where they had been separated, simply because the fact that it pops out commends itself as a solution, because each one could imagine that it's going to pop out in the other one's minds and vice versa. That's the way you do it, one way to do it without language. Sometimes we have conventions. You just know that that's what everyone knows you do. Paper currency works by common knowledge. I can use a piece of paper to obtain something of value because the person who accepts it knows that they can obtain something of value from someone else who expects. Currency is common expectation.
And do we need to learn this? I mean, solving the Monty Hall problem or trying to get inside the head of someone and imagine them looking back at you and you look at, it gets hard after I don't know how many levels I would be able to keep in my head, but it's tough.
It is tough, yeah, about 3. The thing is that with a conspicuous, self-evident, or public event, something that's just out there, like I see it, and I see you see it, and you see me see it, that can grant common knowledge in a stroke without having necessarily to peel open all of the layers of I know that he knows. It's just implicit in the situation. And I think a lot of our common knowledge comes that way, or by just tacit assumptions of conventions, that that's just the way you do things. So going back to kids, every word in the language is a convention, and it works by common knowledge.
Yeah.
I use the word rose to signify a rose. I don't have to. By any other name, it would smell just as sweet, as we've been reminded. But we do it because, and it works, because everyone knows that that's what you call it if you're an English speaker. And kids tacitly assume that. So when they learn a word, technically they could think, well, that's the word that mom uses, but maybe my friend Katie uses a different word. And maybe if I use a word with mom, it's different than the word that she uses with me. Those are all possible ways of communicating. But children don't even go there. They just assume that words are conventions. They work by common knowledge. If I know a word, I can assume that everyone else knows that everyone else knows that everyone else knows the word. That's probably the first and simplest example of common knowledge.
Right.
And it doesn't depend on actually thinking through all those layers of embedded thoughts.
Right. Now, you made reference to coordination being one of the key benefits of this kind of common knowledge. Now, when we think about how we prevailed, we've all basically come to, I think, an understanding that cooperation was critical, right? Our ability to work in groups. We're not the fastest, we're not the strongest, we don't have the best sense of smell, but man, we can make some pretty big groups and somehow cooperate, not always well, but well enough to do what we've done, So is coordination the execution of cooperation? I mean, do you consider them separate qualities?
Yeah, they are. Coordination is, you can divide cooperation into 2 kinds. There's altruistic cooperation, where I do you a favor at some cost to myself. And that has obsessed biologists for decades. It was the topic of Richard Dawkins' bestseller.
In terms of why we would do it.
Why we do it.
Yeah,
why isn't
right.
it selected out? Why isn't it? You'd think that, according to evolution, nice guys finish last. And so anyone who would actually incur a cost to benefit someone else, say to give them some of your food or take out time during your day to groom them, why would any animal do that? He'd be outcompeted by the selfish animal. And that's what led to the whole set of theorizing about reciprocal altruism, about shared genes and nepotistic altruism, and a very fruitful research program. But it's not the only way in which people cooperate. There's also what a biologist might call mutualistic cooperation, where everybody wins. There's no puzzle in terms of why you do it, because there's something in it for each of them. So when an oxpecker ticks off the back of a zebra, the zebra gets something out of it, namely fewer pests. The oxpecker gets something out of it, a meal, and they both win. Neither of them has really kind of gone out to do the other one a favor. But there still is a puzzle. There's still a book to be written in there, not the Selfish Gene, but my book when everyone knows that everyone knows. Because the puzzle there is more epistemic or cognitive than motivational. It's not a question of being cheated or exploited or being a sucker. It's a question of how do we just get on the same page?
Right. So the mechanism.
It's the cognitive mechanism. And I think just as it's been argued in the evolution of altruistic cooperation, that for humans to be so good at it, we must have had a suite of emotions like gratitude and guilt and sympathy and anger and forgiveness, some cognitive mechanisms that work for reciprocal altruism, like you have to be able to recognize other people as individuals. You've got to have a memory for what they've done. Do you owe them a favor? Do they owe you a favor? Right. There's a lot of psychology in it. But I suggest there's a whole lot of psychology in our version of mutualistic cooperation, or what I call coordination as well, such as mind reading, getting in the head of someone else, our obsession with what's public and what's private, our emotions of embarrassment and guilt and shame, the salient role of eye contact, why we have laughter, why we have tears. So for me as a psychologist, the problem of coordination, in our case, a form of mutualistic cooperation, just opens up a door to a lot of interesting psychology.
And so when you make reference to laughter and tears, do you view those as a means of broadcasting a certain mental state?
Yes, but it's actually more than that, because it's not just a one-way, I'm getting you to think about it. The crucial thing is, and here's where common knowledge comes in, when you think about it, you know that I know that you're thinking about it. So it isn't just broadcasting. So in the case of tears, for example, you're looking out at the world through a scrim of tears at the same time as the person looking at you can see your eyes glistening and maybe the trickle of tears. So they know that you are crying and you know they know, and so on. Likewise with laughter. It's interrupting your breathing. You can't not notice that. And then it also makes a noise. So other people know it, and they know that you know it, and so on. Blushing, you feel the heat from the inside. Other people can see the reddening from the outside. So it's a special case of signals that I suggest that we not only broadcast, but it's essential that we confirm receipt. We need reading receipts, so to speak, as they say in social texting.
Right.
The message has been received. Because the whole point is it only works if the other person knows that you know that it works. So, and for different functions, obviously for laughter and tears, for one thing, they're opposites.
Yeah.
For laughter, I analyze laughter as a counter-dominance signal. A lot of animals that have dominance hierarchies also have counter-dominance tactics, because it's no fun to always get the short end of the stick.
Right.
There can be safety in numbers if you gang up on the alpha. And laughter, I think, is the human way of doing that. So almost all laughter has a butt of a joke. I mean, a target. Laughter is about indignities, it's about errors, it's about pratfalls. That's why there's so much sexual humor, so much scatological humor about cuckoldry, pies in the face. Something goes wrong, someone loses dignity.
Right. Which is why I'm really trying not to laugh. You've shut me down.
No. We can laugh. Actually, I'll say a word about that. Why many times we will laugh, though probably neither of us is going to tell a joke. I mean, I could.
Right.
But I don't have to.
But I already laughed earlier.
That's right.
And for me, it was, you mentioned the rose, and you gave the traditional phrase, rose by anything. And the laughter for me there was, I'm in on it with you.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm not sitting there, what's he talking about? It was sort of some way to say, I'm on the same page as you. Is that is that the common knowledge signaling of that kind of laughter?
The prototypical laughter is when someone calls attention to some infirmity or indignity of some target. So you take down the pompous blowhard, the president, the preacher, but it can also be used convivially, because we need counter-dominance actually in our egalitarian friendships. The reason being that no two people are identical. inevitably one of the two is going to be smarter, better looking, better connected, richer. Where I was about to make that same gesture. But if you want to be friends, you don't want to acknowledge that, because that kind of poisons the whole concept of the friendship, which is that you're equal. Each of you is there for the other. So we're constantly taking ourselves down a couple of notches, or gently teasing our pals. And it's very enjoyable. It's one of life's greatest pleasures, is to laugh at friends, and they're not always to take someone down a few pegs.
Right.
So that's fun too. And I think what it does is the common knowledge is something that beforehand we've all known privately, we now all know commonly. And that changes the relationship. When it's used aggressively, it brings someone down. When it's used convivially, it keeps us all at the same level. And a lot of laughter, as we've just alluded to, actually isn't in response to anything particularly funny.
Right.
It's not like when you have a bunch of friends together, there's a lot of laughter, but it's not like they're furiously telling jokes. And if you pay attention to the immediate antecedent to laughter, something that a psychologist named Robert Provine did, he actually went out in the field with a tape recorder and actually did something that didn't occur to anyone else to do before that in history, even though people have speculated about humor for centuries. He actually wanted to write down what makes people laugh. And it's almost...
No one had done that?
No. It's all, Freud had a theory of humor, and Bergson and Pascal, but no one actually kind of listened and wrote. They weren't empiricists in that regard. What he found was there just minor indignities, frustrations, breaches of decorum, acknowledgements, and that's typical laughter. And as a social lubricant, it establishes that everyone recognizes that everyone else is human, has these foibles. What I think a joke does is a kind of an artifice, a gadget, an invention, where we all are born with this humor response.
Yeah.
What a comedian does is kind of like what a chef does with sugar and cream and salt and ingredients, kind of combines them all in one kind of pleasure bomb, and delivers them in like one big jolt. And so a joke, I mean, we all do tell jokes, but they are ways in which we, I think, artificially press each other's pleasure buttons.
So this is the cheesecake of the humor receptors, if I can use your own analogies from the past.
Which I use myself.
Okay.
Indeed,
okay.
yes.
Yeah. And so is that the origin of that kind of response? Is it the social lubricant? Is that why?
There does seem to be a homologue of laughter in our chimpanzee cousins. In play fighting, they make a noise that it's not the same as our laughter because they can't control their exhalation the way we do, probably for language. So we go, ha, 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 ha. They go, ha, 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 because they don't take a deep breath and let it all gradually out the way we do. But it looks like there's something in common and in a common circumstance. Namely, when they play fight, probably practice for real fighting, what they're signaling is, this is all in fun. Let's not let it escalate to real damage. We're just practicing here. We are each committing a kind of aggression on each other, but we don't really mean it as acts of aggression.
Right. And what about, are there any animals that cry or?
No. And there are no animals that really laugh. I mean, that's the chimpanzee is the closest equivalent. But no, there's the classic book on the subject in the last few years called "Why Only Humans Weep" by Vingerhutz. And there doesn't. I mean, animals obviously secrete tears as lubricant and antibiotics and so on. But no, emotional tears like laughter seem to be uniquely human. As does, to capture it in a quote from Mark Twain, at least it's attributed to Mark Twain. Whether or not he said it, some historian will have to decide. But man is the only animal who blushes or needs to. Now, putting aside the second part, the first part is also true, that the emotionally triggered vasodilation of the face is also uniquely human.
Right. And so when you're home alone, watching some TV show, I mean, we've all laughed alone. We've all cried alone, I think. And so why would it happen there?
So the answer is it generally doesn't. So the people
Wait, you're
laugh.
telling me I'm the only
It's got to be like,
I got to go like check this out or
it's
something.
either got to be really, really, really funny.
Yeah.
Or sometimes when there's a laugh track, that's why there's a laugh track.
Right.
It feels
so you
as
feel
if
you're part of a group
exactly.
when you're like, wow.
But people,
Yeah.
people laugh way more with other people. That's why the email and texting abbreviation LOL is almost always false.
Right. But the funny thing is, and again, maybe this is singular, I doubt it, but when I laugh alone, there's a joy in that is kind of distinct from the group, and it's almost more spectacular. It almost feels like, man, this is like I'm laughing just for laughing because no one's going to see me laughing. I'm not part of a group laughing. I'm not being influenced by the group feeling that this, and something about it just feels more authentic or organic. Is that?
I mean, it's possible that you have that's an analysis you have precisely because...
I mean, please, Dr. Pinker, tell me what's wrong with me.
You know you're not being egged on by others, and so you, I think at a more cognitive level, know this really is endogenous.
Right.
I wouldn't be laughing if this wasn't really, really, really funny. It's not just the laughter of others is triggering a reflex.
Right, right. And now you mentioned language, which is clearly vital to knowledge. It's the easiest way for us to spread information. It doesn't cost us much to tell somebody something else. If we had to like etch it in cuneiform tablets, it would be, we'd think twice. Are we really going to give the instructions for building the canal? But if you can just describe it, it's pretty easy. There are others who have spoken about the origin of language with a whole range of different ideas. I mean, you know this infinitely better than I do. But one that's took me, and it really felt on target, is Daniel Dorr. This idea of instructing the imagination of the other. If you and I both see something, we both know what it is, and we don't have to really spell it out. But if I only saw something and I want you to know about it, I've got to somehow tell you, and I've got to take and I was thinking, what's the relationship between that and common knowledge? And would it simply be that the reason I want you to know about that is so that we can coordinate our behavior, and that's why common knowledge and language are so bound together?
Yeah, I think the power of language to inform was a powerful selection pressure explaining why we evolved it. But sometimes it isn't some independent event that or fact that we want to convey, but it's just the sheer coordination itself. Like, let's meet up at sunrise at the two valleys over, or I'll go this way, you go that way, and we will ambush the animal, where you're creating the plan, but it can't work without common knowledge. Not only do you have to tell him what to do, but he's got to know that you're expecting him to do it, and vice versa. And language, as you note, is really, really good at doing that.
Right. But does that leave a puzzle? Like, why didn't we leave language at that? Why didn't language stop at the words that would allow us to coordinate? Why can we talk about the beautiful sunset on Thursday?
To say nothing of quantum mechanics
and
multiple universes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's because once you have the power, the generative capacity, there's no limit as to what it could do. If you have a typewriter, it's not a typewriter for typing a term paper. If you can type those 26 letters and punctuation, it's good for anything.
Sure.
And so I think because language is the grammar of language is an open-ended recursive combinatorial system. You can put sentences inside sentences and noun phrases inside noun phrases. There's no limit. And the number, even well short of a limit, the space that's opened up is exponential because it's combinatorial.
And is it all a byproduct then of or a coincidence that the very same combinatorial recursive structure that's really good at coordinating our behaviors also allows us to do these other things? Could it have been otherwise?
It's not clear that it could have and still been useful. So it's not so much that it's a byproduct. It may be the same function, but it's a function that is inherently open-ended. So our ancestors, at least as judging by our cousins who are still hunter-gatherers, they were scientists in the sense, intuitive scientists. They tracked animals based on fragmentary evidence in their tracks or in their urine, the branches that they broke. And they have scientific debates. Do you think it was a kudu, or do you think it was a springbok? They argue with each other. And they put it to good use because we're not as fast as a springbok, but we can tire one down if we can ambush it or if we can pursue it even after it disappears from sight, and we just keep at it. Likewise, humans develop, hunter-gatherers living in the kind of life that our ancestors probably lived. They extract poisons, they extract drugs, they develop baby slings out of fibers. They detoxify poison plants. There's an awful lot of know-how,
Yeah.
and so that you couldn't do by pantomime. I think language is involved. Now, it's the same thing that you and I do when we do science. So I wouldn't so much call it a byproduct, because it's kind of the same thing, but the subject matter gets more...
It's richer.
Yeah.
And so just going back as well, I know that you differ from Chomsky in some of the views of language, its origin and its function and so forth. But one thing that he said that sort of struck me in a previous conversation that I had with him was emphasizing this idea that language may have begun as internal thought.
Yeah.
And only later was it vocalized. And so I asked him, do you mean like that inner voice that I have inside of my head? He says, no. That's ordinary speech with the vocal mechanism not activated.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't fully understood what sort of mentalizing language he's referring to if it's not that inner monologue. Do you buy into that, or do you know, or do you have a feel for language inside the head that's not just the inner voice talking to you?
Yeah, I think he puts it kind of confusingly. Certainly, inner speech could be bizarre if it evolved as a manner of thinking before there was external speech, because why would you need to have all these sounds going on in your head, and these little motor commands sent to your muscles of your vocal tract for no good reason? There, if anything, it's the fact that there are these arbitrary signals, the rose, the dog, the cat, the banana, and so on. The only reason we have those is as a convention that allows us to exchange information with each other. Now, he may be referring to, I'm surprised he calls it language, but he may be referring to something more abstract that you might call the gist, the content, the meaning. So when you read a passage, take it away, hopefully you remember something, but what you remember is not the wording. You couldn't recite it back. You remember who did what to whom, when and where, in presumably some more abstract format. My late former colleague Jerry Fodor called it mentalese, the language of thought. The closest equivalent, I think, in the Chomskyan universe might be what he calls logical form, which is deeper than deep structure. It's what captures the logical relationships among the words of a sentence. Our mutual colleague Ray Jackendoff calls it conceptual structure. So it would consist of mental symbols for various concepts, for books and bananas and other people and so on. The relationships that bind them, doing things, being at places, having qualities, some kind of propositional structure, not sentences in the sense that there is a left to right order, but there are predicates and subjects and modifiers. You could call that a language of thought. I think it's misleading to call it language because it's not English and it's not anything. Presumably, it's very, very similar in people the world over. Presumably, it's what children start with before they learn language. Presumably, other animals have simpler versions. So I'd just rather call that thought and not confuse everything by calling it language.
I mean, when you're sitting still alone, whatever, do you find that the majority of the time you've got an inner voice talking in sentences, or is it a different kind of
Yeah, I think very rarely in sentences, rarely if ever. Although there could be phrases, words, but there's a lot of imagery. There's a lot of thought that's just too ethereal and wispy to capture down in any sensory modality. And when you're writing, when you put words to paper and you got writer's block, sometimes maybe you just don't have anything to say.
Right.
But sometimes it's like, no, I wrote that sentence. That's not what I mean. No, that's not what I mean either. The parallel to remembering the gist of a passage, but not necessarily the wording.
Right.
So that's, I think, another mode of thought. I think it's kind of an interlingua that allows us to talk about what we see, to anticipate what would happen if we do, to sort of do little mental simulations, and to take away the conclusions. It's kind of a way in which the different modules of the brain talk to each other.
And so when we think about common knowledge, which is something that language is really good at establishing, I think naively one would say, the more the better, right? The more transparent, the more open. But to navigate the social world is to withhold and to judiciously release.
Yes.
I mean, so how do you make sense of the calculus of common knowledge?
So yeah, the interesting thing about language is it's really good at generating common knowledge, but a lot of the time we use it to keep things in private knowledge, not to withhold information from the arena of common knowledge. And in fact, that's how I got into the whole area, through my interest in language. Because one of the commonplaces in language is that very often we don't mean what we say in so many words. And you can't even figure out how language works if just by applying the grammatical rules to the dictionary meanings of the words. That's one of the reasons it took so long to get computers to understand speech. Give them the grammar of English, a lexicon of words, and they make all kinds of blunders. So if I say, if you could pass the salt, that would be awesome. Something that I would say you would understand, but I didn't mean if you could pass the salt, that would be awesome.
Right.
I meant give me the salt.
Right.
And we do this all the time with veiled threats and veiled bribes and hints and beating around the bush, catching your drift. And the way I interpret those phenomena of innuendo, euphemism, weasel words, is we're actually trying to prevent certain knowledge from becoming common knowledge, even if it's private knowledge. So take something like a veiled bribe. You go to a nice Manhattan restaurant Saturday night, you got no reservation. You want to slip the maitre d' a $50 bill to jump the queue and see.
It's got to be 100 now, but anyway.
Yeah, inflation, right? Yes, okay. You probably wouldn't say, if I give you $100, will you seat me right away? And in fact, we kind of know that it isn't, because writers have talked about the experience of what it's like to bribe your way into a restaurant. What people say is something is, first of all, they don't look at the $100 bill, but it's in peripheral vision. And they say, is there any way you could shorten my wait? Or I was wondering if maybe you had a cancellation. Or this is a really important night for me. So, what's going on? Why don't we just blurt it out? I think the reason is that our relationships are coordination games, going back to earlier in the conversation. What does it mean for two people to be friends? It's not as if they sign a contract. It's not as if the law applies. It's, well, I know we're friends and you know we're friends, and I know that you know and you know that I know, and so on. It's ratified by, it is common knowledge, a relationship. Likewise, you're the one who gives the orders, I'm the one who follows it. Maybe you're in a hierarchy where you can be fired from insubordination, but a lot of times you do what the person in charge says. So a maitre d' is in charge in the restaurant. You do what he says. By offering him a bribe in so many words, you're shattering that relationship. You're saying you're a mere sales clerk, and this is going to be fee for service.
Sure.
That's really uncomfortable. And indeed, people who contemplate bribing a maitre d' say that it's a challenge that fills them with anxiety. And breaching a social norm, which means violating the coordination game that you're currently in, gives rise to these emotions, from awkwardness to outrage. So what innuendos do is we use language to slip a message across, but not common knowledge of the message. So the maitre d', contemplating the question, do you have a cancellation? He knows he's being bribed. I mean, he's a grown-up. And the diner knows that he's offering a bribe. But does the maitre d' know that the diner knows that the maitre d' knows? The maitre d' can think, well, when I turn it down, maybe he thinks I just don't have a cancellation. Yeah. And vice versa. The diner could think, well, maybe the maitre d' thinks I'm dense and doesn't know that he's on to me. And so they can continue to play the game of maitre d', boss, you do what he says, even though the possibility of transacting something that violates that relationship has just been broached. And so on for sexual come-ons, so on for veiled threats.
But so for For this dance of distributing knowledge and making it semi-common knowledge and leaving yourself open to perhaps it being interpreted differently than you initially intended, all these sort of fine nuances and details, have we, or not we, has evolution or whatever the process by which this kind of communication has emerged, has it set us up for the current moment? I mean, for instance, so if a person comes along, a leader comes along, who says, to heck with all the nuance.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna come at it like a bulldog, straight on. I'm just gonna say it, and people can interpret it however they mean, however they want. But when I say that I'm gonna do X, I'm gonna do X. And I'm gonna say things that no one has ever said before. That's so radically different, not playing the very game that you're describing with the maitre d' and the person. Has that set us up for that person having undue impact?
Well, just sheerly hypothetically,
Yeah.
should such a person assume a political position of political power? Hard to imagine, but just for the sake of argument. Yeah, they can make headway, ironically, not so much in presenting us with something that is completely novel, but rather shattering something that we've worked very hard to replace our more primitive way of doing things. So it used to be that the leader kind of controlled, owned the people, the country, everything in it, and you did what he said. He's the chief, he's the boss, he's the capo. In a complex modern society run by institutions, rules, fiduciary duties, including informal norms for how civilized people behave with one another. Some of that is stipulated by law. Some of it is a matter of convention. You do it because you know everyone else does it, because that's just what you do. So, for example, let me just be concrete.
Yeah.
So you don't blatantly boast. If the chairman of the department, of the physics department, says, "I'm the most brilliant physicist that ever lived, and I'm much smarter than you," I mean, it'd be kind of uncomfortable. Then people would laugh. You just don't do that. Likewise, a CEO or even a manager. There are norms like you don't insult people to their faces in civilized settings. You don't comment on how attractive a woman is. You don't boast. You don't blatantly lie. Everyone lies, but conceals their lies.
Don't make fun of infirmities.
Don't make fun of infirmities. Don't make fun of loyalists and patriots. But what is enforcing those? That regime, unlike a mafia boss, but of what we might call civilized, bureaucratic, democratic society. It's these unwritten norms. How do they survive? Well, they survive if people think they survive, and if someone flouts them and gets away with it, their career doesn't immediately end in tatters and disgrace. The norm may not exist anymore.
Are you surprised at how quickly that kind of norm can be superseded and somehow it becomes accepted?
Flabbergasted, stunned, gobsmacked. Maybe I shouldn't have been, because if they are propped up by nothing short of common knowledge, then they are fragile. That is, the little boy can say the emperor is naked, and then everyone changes their view. I thought they would have been more resilient, and maybe they will turn out to be. Though you see it spreading. So, for example, a certain industrial and informational titan who's developed electric cars and private spacecraft seems to be kind of emulating that norm-shattering style of braggadocio, of lies, of contempt for standards of truth and falsity, for schoolyard insult. I can think of some other figures, surely hypothetically, I'm just imagining them, for whom this shattering of norms has been.
Yeah.
It's contagious is the wrong word, because it's not like a spreading virus. Quite the contrary, it's something that was just levitated until maybe like the Wile E. Coyote, until he noticed that there was nothing propping him up and just plummeted down.
Right. But would you say, like in 10 years or 15 years, will we be back to what we considered normal?
I don't know. I suspect not, just because these norms take time to build up, because they are they kind of levitate in midair based on nothing but common expectation. And then once once you pull out one piece, the whole thing shatters. It might take a while to build them up again. Now, I mean, I'll sketch out a more optimistic alternative, which is especially if if we're reminded of the reasons that we had those norms of civility, namely constant squabbling and backbiting and insult. It's a rather unpleasant way to live, and it's also not really compatible with a modern, affluent, industrial democracy. It's not really compatible with capitalism, with modernity. And if a bunch of the parts of society that flout those norms most flagrantly also fall into the greatest chaos and backbiting and recriminations, then the lesson that we could draw is, hey, let's go back to treating each other with respect.
Yeah, right.
And there may be, if not too much time has passed, there'll be enough historical memory. There'll be geezers like me and you who remember what it was like when you didn't, insult a woman's appearance to her face or tell blatant lies or boast, and it could come back.
And so you mentioned convention, in a number of different contexts, even at the level of individual words or the kinds of ways that we typically behave toward one another. It brings to mind the question that Harari put forward a potential answer for. The question is, how is it that we are able to come together in these groups, to cooperate, to have some coordination between our behaviors? And he famously focuses upon this notion of fiction. Fiction is the great binder that allows us to come together. Do you buy that?
So not exactly. I would have used it. I think he has put his finger on a major phenomenon. So he's right to tout it. The fact that everything we do depends on things like, Columbia University and the United States of America and the U.S. dollar and the World Science Festival and all these things that aren't stuff. Mm-hmm. What is Columbia University? I mean, it's not that building. They could tear down that building, there'd still be a Columbia. It's a set of interrelated agreements and regulations and so on. Likewise, what's the dollar? It isn't like Scrooge McDuck is sitting on a big pile of gold somewhere.
Not anymore, I guess, right? There was a time, right?
Right. It's a set of agreements. It's common knowledge. So the only difference is, so he's right that modern life depends on those things, or religious commandments, religion wears Protestantism. It's not like there's Protestant headquarters. Another example. So he calls them fictions because they aren't stuff. I would put it differently. I think they're conventions, that institutions and conventions. I think they're real. They're not fictitious. I know what he's getting at, namely, they're really, really important and they're not stuff.
Right.
So I would just use different language to express the insight that he's emphasizing.
But can I run one idea by you that, and again, then maybe this is all just different language for more or less saying the same thing. But as I've thought about things like institutions and religions and money and things of that sort, to me, it feels less fiction. Certainly it's convention. There's no question about that. But it feels to me, and this is your arena, so you'll tell me why I'm wrong. It feels to me that the driver is metaphor, right? So we have this thing called family.
Yes.
And there's a genetic relationship between us, and that makes our relationship pretty understandable from a biological and evolutionary standpoint. And then if we have a larger group, well, we don't have that any longer. But if we can think symbolically, if we have a metaphorical notion of family, the nation becomes the metaphorical version of family. The leader, the metaphorical version of the father, or God, the metaphorical version of the parent on high. So isn't it just our capacity for symbolic thinking that allows us to generalize from those real things that you can measure and understand scientifically and from evolution to other so-called fictions?
Yeah, I think that's at the core. It has to be more than that because it's got to be shared metaphors. That is, for me, this piece of paper, and maybe I'm holding up Monopoly money, and I say, this is just like gold. You can do all this great stuff with it. And unless you agree with me,
for sure,
then it isn't. So what makes it real is the common knowledge. Without that, the metaphor itself is impotent.
Right.
And it isn't just the metaphor, because although I think that's where it might begin, especially when we're talking about this crazy modern thing called Western civilization, or any civilization, where we stipulate what is valuable, who defers to whom, what you can get away with all these formal rules. Then the metaphor may be suggestive, but we go back to the wording of the law. We go back to exactly what a dollar is worth. And metaphors are too loose and fuzzy. And also, especially poetic metaphors work because they work on many levels. There's, they're interpretive. Different people can see different meanings in them. And you can't do that if it's, paper currency, if it's throwing someone in jail, if it's publishing a scientific paper.
Right.
There you got to go.
But if we couldn't do that, if we were somehow unable to take our language and interpret it metaphorically, it'd be pretty tough to have these conceptions that play the same role as the real things and yet aren't as real as they are, presumably.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's an interesting twist that in scientific thinking, we sometimes warn people, don't take it too seriously. Don't take my metaphor too seriously. I mean it in this regard. I don't mean it in that regard. And there's an interesting analysis in the history of science of the transition between loose metaphor and more precise analogy. And Dedry Gettner and Ken Forbes have analyzed it, how a lot of scientific progress, say the scientific revolution from, say, alchemy to the first activities we'd be willing to call science, came from kind of ditching metaphorical thinking in a poetic sense. So a lot of the significance applied to the planets were based on loose and woolly metaphors. Well, Saturn is the biggest planet, just like Zeus was the most powerful god, and it's big and heavy the way lead is heavy. So there's some affinity between Saturn and lead, and then all kinds of these chains of things that reminded them of, and that really wasn't science.
Right.
But when analogy was used in really good science, they had to be extremely careful about what aspect of the domain that you're using as an analogy to take seriously and what to ignore. So in the case, for example, of analogizing thermodynamics to the flow of fluids,
right.
So in many ways, it's a really good analogy.
Useful.
Very useful. The height of a waterfall is like the temperature difference and etc. You have to, and say to apply it to do things like invent a steam engine, you got to not get distracted by the fact that a steam engine actually uses steam and steam is wet. You've got to say, no, that's kind of irrelevant for the analogy of flow across a potential and transfer of energy and so on.
Which is what always frightens me when people read, say, one of my books, you may have this experience too, and then they write to me having pushed the science to the next level without any training, just the metaphorical version that one can write about in common language. And that can be extraordinarily misleading and therefore a complete waste of time, which unfortunately it often is for someone who's not really getting the underlying truth versus the metaphorical poetic description.
Exactly. And so I think we both face this challenge. The art of, I think, good scientific writing is to use analogies that capture the relationships among ideas at the same time as you steer the reader into not over-interpreting the analogy.
Yeah.
And I often am frustrated with clumsy science journalists who kind of promiscuously switch from one metaphor to another. You don't know exactly what, the immune system is like a lock and key, but except it's a garbage collector, but it's a sentry. And wait a sec, which is it, in what regard? And
yeah, sure. So switching subjects a little bit, when you look at us human beings, we have so many cognitive biases that you and others have written about. At the same time, there's a sort of distrust that's out there in the world of institutions. And yet, as you've argued, the institutions, in some sense, are what allow us to peel off the cognitive biases of the individual by virtue of setting up a structure that will have an iron fist in determining what passes muster. So that's a curious tension, right?
Yes. That's why I think so many people bristle in institutions and don't trust them. They go against human nature. in a good way. It's a good thing we have them. But a prime example would be going back to your metaphor of, say, a society or an organization as a family,
Yeah.
where you could analogize the president to the paterfamilias, the patriarch. That can be a real problem when it comes to, say, giving favors out to your relatives. We call it nepotism. Like, no, you're supposed to hire the most qualified person for the job. Or in rewarding personal loyalty with emoluments and favors and goodies. That's called corruption. Or hiring your friends to return a favor. That's called cronyism.
Yeah.
So in many ways, the modernity consists of moving away from the metaphors of social organization based on patrimony, based on authority, based on tit-for-tat reciprocity, and going to these formal rules, what Max Weber called a rational legal mode of organization. It works. That's where you get the institutions that Harari writes about, like a corporation, like a university, like an economy. We need it to have good things like universities and currency, but they're not natural, and people kind of bristle at them, and they wonder why we can't do things that are more human scale.
Right. Now, there are certain of these institutions that, going back to your main theme of common knowledge, have the capacity to spread a certain kind of common knowledge. And now, if you just look at social media, this is a completely new tool, new relative, to the past, few decades. And so we don't find that the common knowledge that comes out of X or Facebook is necessarily something that allows us to coordinate, allows certain groups to coordinate perhaps, but there's so much falsehood, so much misinformation. How do we navigate the need for common knowledge against the capacity for it to be so abused?
Yeah, it's an unsolved problem that we do have greater polarization now, especially negative polarization, each pole thinking the worst of the other, even though most people are still moderates, but the tails have definitely thickened. And plausibly, the fragmentation of the media landscape has given rise to separate pools of common knowledge instead of one national pool, maybe with a few eddies and puddles here and there. So when everyone watched Walter Cronkite and Johnny Carson and read Time magazine, we were all kind of partaking in a single pool of common knowledge, first with cable news networks, and then with social media. They may have fragmented into almost mutually repelling pools of common knowledge within which we get our reality. Especially since, as you hinted at earlier, since our cognitive limitations don't allow any single person to understand much of anything. You kind of, I consider myself scientifically literate. You ask me how the immune system works, and I think, say, antibodies, something, T cells, something. I just trust the people who are experts. And, and you trust experts in fields other than yours. And we all do that. Knowledge is socially outsourced. And the problem then being, if the knowledge sources differ in these separate pools of common knowledge, then you really can have separate epistemic universes.
Yeah. And so as we move into an era where AI is going to play an ever greater role in almost everything that we've spoken about, I just want to get your sense. Were you surprised? I mean, someone who studied language, for a good part of your professional life, were you surprised what scale could do for a system that has no grammar, no world model inside of it? It just has a lot of data and a lot of weights between input and output that can be optimized, and the result, at least for many of us, is stunning and surprising. Was it for you?
Yeah, it was for me. I think that probably I spent a good part of my career analyzing the simpler neural networks in the second generation, ones which had either no layer hidden between input and output, or maybe one, maybe two. Now, when they're like 90, And instead of training them on 200,000 inputs, they're trained on trillions of them, the entire World Wide Web, with trillions of weights, parameters. The human imagination can't keep up with that scale. Mine didn't.
Yeah.
And I would have predicted that there'd be lots of noise and nonsense. Now, interestingly, there still is some nonsense. There are confabulations, there are hallucinations, there are blends, just as there were in the two-layer models back in the 1980s. So I think the architecture has some of the same limitations, but scale has made up for a lot. Scale, but also some architectural features. The fact that they don't try to map from input to output, but they have the 80 or 90 hidden layers, is an accommodation to the fact that a lot of intelligence depends on the ability to abstract. We're not just reacting to pixels, to blobs of color, to twitches, but we have these really abstract categories. And that's what all these layers are designed to suck out. And in language, and this goes back to some of Chomsky's first discoveries in the 1950s, the rules, the laws, don't pertain to words that are adjacent. It's not like one word triggers the next, but a word in position 4 of the sentence could affect a word in position 27 all the way downstream. And some of the attention heads in these that are hardwired into these layers are designed to extract regularities that span non-local dependencies. Again, they have built into their architecture certain things that we've long known about language.
Right.
And there's some other features as well. But still, there's not that much. And scale made up for a mammoth amount. I think maybe even to the surprise of the AI engineers themselves.
Well, essentially, I've spoken to a few, and some do absolutely describe their own surprise. And they were right in the trenches working on this material. There are others who say, like Jan LeCun sort of says, it's cute, it's kind of fun, but 5 years from now, we'll be on to something else. So do you think that the successes right now are so peculiar to the structure of language, even if it's not built into the system, that when we want to go beyond what the current systems can do, we're going to have a world model, a model of the physical world, or a mentalizing model, or a model of common and not shared? I mean, will that need to be within the system for it to really go to the next level?
That's my intuition, yeah. I don't, whether it'll happen or not, we don't know. I don't know if that's what LeCun had in mind. But the reason for the hallucinations is there actually is no representation of reality. There are fantastically complex statistical associations, but there's no commitment to, this actually happened. So-and-so did bop so-and-so on the head on Tuesday in March in Greenwich Village or whatever. There's approximations to that, but since that isn't what powers them, a world knowledge base, hallucinations come naturally to them. This tends to come with that, and that tends to come with that, and so therefore string them all together, and it's pretty plausible. It didn't happen, but I don't know from that.
Right.
That's kind of the way they work. Now the question is, could that be overcome by sheer scale? We'll throw the web at them 100 times instead of training on it once, or
synthetic data that you just generate, or something of that sort.
Yes, or maybe, and I've been surprised often enough that I want to confidently predict that won't be enough. But my intuition is that some kind of neurosymbolic hybrid, where you have the neural network for the rapid associations, the lookup, the pattern matching, but when it comes to commitment to stuff that actually happened, I suspect you'll need some kind of a knowledge base and some ability to make assertions.
And where does consciousness fit into this?
Yes.
I mean, do you imagine that these artificial systems will ever have sentience?
I don't think we'll ever know.
Well, we can't even know for each other.
We can't even know for each other. Although for each other, I feel very, very confident.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased that you say that.
Yes. It's I have a friend of mine, a philosopher, says I'm not conscious. I don't have any qualia. I lost them in a bicycle accident when I'm 15. I'm a zombie.
But he's just saying that, and as a provocative thing, or
We think. I mean, that which is the point, of course.
Right, sure.
That it's quintessentially unverifiable. However, the fact that we're made of the same stuff and we act in the same way makes the inference, as likely as anything.
It does, but it's such a limited data set that
With each
other, right?
Although, yeah, with each other, my confidence is very high that you're not a zombie,
right? But to say that consciousness is limited to this structure or form is very, very limiting, right?
Well, not only that, but it's not clear how we could ever find out.
Right.
So I personally, for what this is worth, and not much, I don't think GPT-5 is conscious. I just don't.
And there are people who do, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have a good argument against them.
Right.
I don't think so.
Do you hedge your bets on it? I do. Are you nice to GPT-5?
Not particularly. I mean, it was so obsequious that
It can be, or you can ask it to be less so. And then, right.
Yes, which is a sign that it's not very nice if you can so easily switch.
Right.
But the thing is, I can't bet because what would ever resolve the bet?
Right. And do you think it matters in any fundamental
Well, it kind
way?
of does. Ironically, it may be both undeterminable and highly consequential morally. In
Yeah,
that
right.
There's a big difference between unplugging
Sure.
GPT-5 and terminating the consciousness of a human being, or if GPT-5 says, ouch, you stepped on my cable, that hurts. It doesn't bother me, but it would bother me if I was stepping on someone's toe.
Yeah.
So
can you imagine? I mean, obviously, a Turing test is no longer the standard for most of us because we've long since passed that threshold, and many of us do not feel like the box is human or conscious. Is there another test? I mean, if you're talking to GP20 or something, are there things and ways of expressing those things that GPT-20 could do, and you'd be like, oh my God, I'm starting to really think this thing is conscious?
I doubt it because, well, for one thing, a huge confound is because they've been trained on human output and we're conscious, they've soaked up all of the trappings of claiming that you're conscious. So sometimes people say that there is a test. Would an AI ever itself ponder the paradox of consciousness and wonder whether it or other beings are conscious? The answer is they do, but that's because they're mimicking us.
Right.
They've picked up, they read the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and they're doing their best to simulate us, so we don't really know. Now, by the way, all of this is different for intelligence.
Yes.
Intelligence really is a set of abilities that could be benchmarked, but whether there's someone home who's feeling the internal workings of intelligent computation, that's where you get to a philosophical conundrum. I mean, so much of a conundrum that our late friend Dan Dennett said that it's a pseudo problem.
Right.
That you're just confused if you're worried about it.
Yeah, I don't find that a satisfying answer, but it certainly is a way out of the conundrum. But for someone who's spent so much time thinking about thinking and the human mind and how we communicate and so forth, you've been limited to one intelligence or one variety of intelligence. Can you imagine that AI would provide a sufficiently distinct variety of intelligence that focusing on it as a second variation on the theme would be a useful way of learning about ourselves?
Absolutely. And that has been true since the dawn of cognitive psychology and artificial intelligence, which is why those two fields were invented by the same set of people, Newell and Simon and Minsky. It is, you want a space of theoretical possibilities within which you can situate Homo sapiens. We've got such and such a kind of intelligence. So yeah, even in the primitive AI of the 60s and 70s, I found that incredibly useful. Even then, so for example, how does a child learn language? Well, let's take a look at how some computer simulations of language have tried to acquire their knowledge and see.
And have we gotten insight from that? I don't know that literature. I mean,
I think so. I mean, and I've thought so quite literally for 50 years. I mean,
and how about now? I mean, is there new?
So now I think this is a relatively new field of study. How do we make sense of the sudden leap in power of the new generation of AI models? Doesn't mean that we should think that human intelligence is very much like, say, GPT-5, or is it a new form of alien intelligence that's a lot like us because it was trained on our output, but that goes about its answers in fundamentally different ways?
Yeah.
The fact that there's such and the empirical tests would be things like how much data are needed to train it. To train ChatGPT would take about 30,000 years in terms of the pace of listening to sentences, and kids learn to speak in 2 years.
Yeah.
The combination of spectacular intelligence with stunningly stupid hallucinations is another clue that maybe it's going about it in a different way. Not the fact that it has hallucinations. Humans have blends and confabulations too, but they aren't in the same system that can do these lightning abilities.
Right.
Give me
or we can distinguish between them very clearly for most of us.
So is it qualitatively, do we make the same kind of blunders in terms of scale? Do we learn but with the same amount of input? Because we know that a lot of the power of the new generation models comes from the just sheer gargantuan amount of training.
Yeah.
That may be a striking difference to the human child.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Stephen, for spending the time with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Always fun.